Ready. So good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Thank you so much for tuning into the Awaken to Purpose podcast. I am your host, Dr. Vernell. I have an incredible guest today, Morenike Williams, who is the founder of Revision Coaching, a minority woman-owned company that provides tailored coaching and workshop solutions to help lawyers and executives accelerate their personal and professional growth, access untapped potential, and ascend to new heights. Bringing more than 15 years of experience to bear, Morenike curates customized experiences focused on career strategy, effective communication, relationship management, emotional intelligence, and leadership development to propel her clients forward on their career journeys. Her credentials include a BS in Business Administration from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill and a JD from New York University School of Law. And she is a proud member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. Welcome, 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 Morenike.
Yes. Thank you. Appreciate you adding that little thing in there.
Yes, I was like, she forgot to put that on there. That's important because you guys just celebrated your Founders Day.
Exactly, as did you. So and it's honestly, you know how it is when you're doing bios. It's like you don't want it to be too long, so it's in my longer bio. But thank you for adding it. I do appreciate that.
Oh yes. I always want to give a special shout out to the D9 community, so I wanted to make sure. I was looking over like.
Yes. No. I love my DS team.
Yes. And I really appreciate you agreeing to come on to the podcast today. I think what you have to share with people will be really inspiring, really talking about where you were at a certain critical point in your life and where you are and kind of like where you're headed. And so I'm just going to go ahead and turn the mic over to you so you can share your story.
Oh, awesome. Well, first and foremost, thank you for having me. I've been excited and waiting for that invitation to come on the podcast. So when I got it, I was like, yes, I have arrived.
In the name of Jesus.
Right? Listen, we are declaring those things. So happy to be here. As you mentioned, my name is Morenike, and it's been a journey. I think, for those who are just now meeting me, my background is I'm a corporate transactional attorney. I've practiced for 15 years at some very large law firms, both in New York. So I started my practice at Cravath, Swaine and Moore. And then I also practiced at Allen and Overy in London. I spent about 7 years in London, all in total. And when I decided that I didn't want to practice at a law firm anymore, I took a year off and traveled using London as my base prior to transitioning in-house, which is just a way of saying I went into corporations and worked in their in-house legal departments. And so for me, it was like it started when I was young. I grew up watching the Huxtables, and I didn't have any people around me who had kind of like the professional degrees. Most of the people were working class. And so that was my aspiration. She was a lawyer, he was a doctor. I'm like, I'm going to be one of the two. And I took biology. It was awful. And so I was like, there goes doctor. And so now I'm going to be a lawyer. And I think that part, in terms of just thinking about purpose and stuff, that was where I started to probably put on the identity that other people had for me, as opposed to figuring out like what I wanted to do and what would have been most fulfilling to me. Because I was always good at like debating both sides of an argument, seeing things from a different perspective. So I started hearing very early on, you'd be a good lawyer. You should be a lawyer. You're smart. You can do that. And when you don't really have vision, which, we'll talk about more, you just kind of like, you grab onto what other people are saying. These are adults, they're people you trust. And that was it. So I'm going to be a lawyer. So I decided I was going to be a lawyer very early on in my life. And I put together my plan for that. And I did that. Like, I was like, I want to go to this college. I want to go to this law school. I want to go to this law firm. And by the grace of God, all of those things happen. And what I realized, though, in practicing law and being objectively successful, I wasn't fulfilled. And so I also I didn't think I was supposed to be, though. So I looked around and there was a bunch of miserable people. And I said, it's a strong
Wait a minute, Morenike. Okay, so it's like you mapped out this plan for your life, only to get the thing that you really wanted most.
Yep.
and then get there and feel unfulfilled. And then to
Yeah.
look around and everybody else seems unfulfilled and miserable as well. Like, what was that like?
It was it was tough, and I felt, I don't know if disappointed. It's almost like a little bit of like I was bamboozled. But then at the same time, it was, I love the law. Like I like the intellectual stimulation of the work that I was doing. I was working with amazing attorneys. Like these are people who are, top of their profession, killing it, doing all these things. So I didn't actually, I guess I kind of settled into the fact that I wasn't supposed to be fulfilled. Like I
Mm,
was really, this is this career that when you say like I'm an attorney, people look at you a certain way. They give like, oh wow, that's great. So there's this gratification I got from the external affirmation and compliments of being in this profession. So I felt like I'd arrived, and I really, not being happy wasn't part of, like, not being like being happy wasn't part of the equation. Like I
mhm.
was there. I'd gone from growing up where, my mom had to work multiple jobs to make ends meet, to now I'm getting a six-figure salary, like a strong six-figure salary. So whether or not I was happy,
It's
it didn't
irrelevant.
matter. It was like, it
Okay.
was irrelevant. And the idea that I would prioritize happiness over being in a career that I felt externally people felt very highly of. I was doing great work, I was getting great experience, and it afforded me the opportunity to live internationally and to take my mom around the world, to send her on trips. So who am I to be like, I'm not happy? Like, who
Right.
cares? Like that's honestly how I felt. And I convinced myself, and part of, to your question, like how did it feel to realize that I gotten the thing I've been striving for and it wasn't fulfilling? I really just said that, it's what you did all this work for. So this concept of a sunk cost was foreign to me. It's like, I've invested all of this time. It doesn't really matter. I got to make this work, because
Mm,
I didn't see anything else. Like, what else am I going to do? And that was really the thing, is like, you've gone to college, you've gone to law school, and now you're practicing. What else are you going to do? I didn't even think that I could apply my legal background in other ways. So it was a little disconcerting, but I just kind of pushed it down and
mhm.
kept going. And when I talked to people around me about, this isn't necessarily what I want, they're like, yeah, but you get to take the trip. So everyone around me who I was talking to, they'd kind of justified the downsides of working all the crazy hours and doing all of the things with the plus of the things they were able to purchase and the trips they were able to do and being able to provide. So it's what we call the golden handcuffs, is like you get now into this lifestyle that you're afforded because of the salary you have. And trapped sounds like a strong word because you're there voluntarily, but
Well, you said handcuffed, right?
yeah.
So it's almost like you're a prisoner to the thing that you pursued.
Yeah,
Mhm,
that's the perfect way of saying it. And but the thing that was, I think, a little bit of a wake-up call for me is that I want to be very clear. I have friends who are lawyers who absolutely love the practice of law, and they're passionate about it. And it awakens a joy in them that I wasn't experiencing. And
mm,
so that was when I was like, okay, like I just actually had lunch last week when I was in New York with a friend. And I said to him, I was like, there's one thing that has been true since the first day I met you. It's like, you love practicing law. He was like, I really do. Like, he just lit up about it. And so when I started meeting some of those people, where it's like, you're not just doing it for the check, but this intrinsically gets you out of the bed in the morning, you have a joy about it. And I think that was the difference for me between capability and
mhm,
calling. It was like I
mm.
was more than capable to do the job, but I wasn't called to do it, and I wasn't passionate about it in the way that I saw some of my counterparts were. And so that's when I started thinking, like, is there something else that I could or should be doing? And that was when I made the call to my mom.
Mhm.
I was at a point in my career where I would need to be honestly going up for partner and pursuing partnership. And I knew that I didn't want to be a partner. Nothing wrong with it. Some of my favorite people and mentors are partners. It just, I knew it wasn't for me. And so it was a tough day when I called my mom, and it's just like, hey, so this thing that I've been pursuing and putting all this time into, I don't want to do it anymore,
Mm-hmm.
and that I would say to people, especially parents, when your child expresses that, she held space for that. And she was like, I just want you to be happy. So if this doesn't make you happy, I
Mm-hmm.
know that you make a lot of money, but I want you to be happy. And I don't see that in you right now. I don't see that you're happy. I don't see that light in you. So just her being
Mm-hmm.
that, because if she was just like, I mean, you knew it was gonna be tough, you got to suck it up, like I probably would have stayed,
You want to
honestly.
what you're saying just resonates at the core for me. And I don't know if you know this about my story, but I also went to law school.
Mhm.
And I also went to law school because of Claire Huxtable.
Yes.
It was not having a lot of professionals in my family and seeing this Black woman who just had a lot of poise, a lot of grace, and
Mhm.
was incredibly brilliant. Her character was. And I even went as far as wanting to dress like her when I had my first internship at Wells Fargo Bank. And I
Wow.
remember that I got so dressed up and I caught this glimpse of myself. It was in downtown San Francisco, and I had this suit on and it had shoulder pads and everything was
You
matched. And
did.
I saw myself and I was like, I look like Sarah Huxtable. So that part resonated with me. The other thing too is once I got into that internship, I really realized how much I did not love the law.
Mm.
I was so sick in my stomach every time I got to the doors of the building.
Mm.
Every time it was just this feeling that I had like I hate being here. But I loved the money.
Yeah.
And so I could not tell that to my family at the time because they just didn't go to college. So they didn't
Mhm.
understand. They love the idea of me being in law school. They love the idea of me being on the dean's list. They love the idea of me being selected for this internship out of all students to go to Wells Fargo Bank. I could not admit how much I hated it. So I
Mhm.
love
It's real, it's facts.
it was like the money's great. I don't even,
Yeah.
and at the time, I didn't know what to do with all the money that I was making. I'm
Yeah.
just gonna be very honest. I didn't know what to do with it all. And every time someone got into a conversation and they were talking about the law, I just sunk in my spirit. And I quickly tried to change the subject because I didn't like it. And I didn't like the people I was working with. Let me just be honest too. I worked with someone who constantly yelled. Um,
Mm.
and I think he had this tick. It was a tick and he cursed a lot. And I was just
Ugh,
like, it was just
it's too
violent. It felt
much.
violent and oppressive.
Yeah.
But that was a separate feeling of just feeling like I hate, what I'm doing. And I wasn't sure how to really pivot. So I loved hearing that. And I think maybe the support of your mom, did that
Mhm.
inspire you to start like reshaping and pivoting, like how you saw yourself in your life?
100%. I mean, that was definitely the start. I think it was the support I needed to take a faith leap and say, I'm going to stop this path I'm on. I'm going to get off of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't actually know what I'm going to do just yet. Like, I want to take a year off because what I realized about myself is that my identity, like who I am, was completely intertwined with my profession.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know who I was. So when people would even introduce me, this is Morenike the lawyer. This is my friend, the lawyer who lives in London. This is Morenike, she practices law. So that was always a part of how people saw me. And I really, honestly, I went into really deep depression. And the depression was already present. And when I say like now having the language and having done therapy, I can trace it back to probably as early as like 9 or 10. So there's
Mm-hmm.
always been an undercurrent there of things that weren't being dealt with, and it just continued to grow. So being a lawyer in no way, shape, or form caused my depression. It did create, there was an environment that I would say exacerbated it and
Mm-hmm.
added to it at times. And so when I stopped working, now all of those things, I had to confront them. And it was debilitating initially because I didn't even realize how deep it was, how bad it was. I would equate it to like a compression stocking that you put on to keep the swelling down, and I took it off. I'm telling you, like
No,
it was
it's just, you're
just the
like, I love
floodgates.
everything you're saying because it's so real. I mean, for me, I think in my book, I described, you know, deciding to not be in law school at the top of my third year, that it made me feel like a failure because I
Mm,
was the first in my family to go to college, and everyone was looking at me, and everyone was looking at me to be a success. And here I felt like I failed, and I thought my consolation prize was the man that I met, who I would later
mm,
marry, and we got divorced. And
yeah.
so I thought, like, okay. And then it crept back up when the divorce came. It was like,
Mm,
not only did I fail at this career that I thought I really wanted to pursue, but then I failed at being a wife. I felt like a failure as a mother, right? So it was like all these themes of failure kept popping up,
yeah.
because my identity was attached to what I was doing and then who I was with.
Hmm. It's so real. And I think to your point, like that year, so even then I was still wearing a mask because that year I was traveling. I mean, I was hitting all my bucket list items. I was posting on IG. So externally, I had this perfectly curated life that looked amazing. And people are like, oh my gosh, you're living your best life. But then
Mhm.
they didn't see me when I came off of a trip and I would be on the sofa for 2 or 3 weeks, just, trying to will myself to get up and to do stuff. It was just very, very high, very low. And I had to start figuring out who I was because it got to the point of being suicidal. And that was a place that I never like would have thought that I would have gotten to that place. I am super logical, and there is this just level of being illogical that has to be present when you're in that space. Like the things that I believed about myself or that I would replay in my mind didn't make sense. And now when I say it to myself now, I'm like, it completely doesn't make sense and couldn't be farther from the truth. But at that time, in that space where I was, that was my truth and that was the narrative. And it just sent me spiraling deeper and deeper. And so part of the identity piece is I had to start figuring out, who am I? What
Mhm.
value do I bring to the table outside of law? And I had to put law, because I did intellectually, again, enjoy it, but I had to put it in the bucket of, this is my profession. This is not who I am. It's what I do. And it's one of many things I'm capable of doing. And so even just resetting and reframing how I viewed it, how I allowed kind of people to introduce me. And if they introduced me as Morenike, the lawyer, I didn't take offense, but I didn't pick that up. Like, that's not who I am. That's just in this
Mhm.
setting, how you're referring to me. But I had to figure out who I was. And I think
Mhm.
that we often don't spend enough time getting clear on who we are.
Mhm.
And so when you're not anchored to that, you get pulled in every other direction.
Mhm.
Like when people, like, so feedback, for instance, one of the reasons I think people struggle with feedback is because it can hurt sometimes, especially when it's constructive. But because you're not clear on who you are, you
Mhm.
can't just take it for what it is, which is data. It's information of how someone experienced you in a certain set of circumstances. And so if I know, like, I'm a kind person and I'm talking to someone who's, oh, you're mean or you're this and that. Well, if I'm not anchored to truth, like, I'm kind, but what I'm hearing you say is, when you encountered me, something about our interaction left you with that impression. Now I'm going to go through the data and I can sift through, like, what was the dialogue? How are we interacting? I have better clarity on how you receive information. And so I can make some of those refinements. But if I don't know who I am, now I'm like, oh, they're mean. So I over calibrate, I over course correct. And you see people who then start doing too much. And so it's
Mhm.
like, oh, I got to be super perfect and super nice and all of these things. And you're going above and beyond at the expense of yourself because you weren't anchored in the first place.
I think sometimes people have these identity crises and they don't know that that they're in crisis,
Yeah.
right? They don't understand because so much, I think, of American culture anyway, so much is tied into success, what people define as success, because
Hmm.
you might define it might be differently. And that sometimes means money, power, like
Yep.
status, titles, right, are huge. And so when you attach yourself to those things, right? You don't understand and see that you're even in an identity crisis. You don't see
Mhm.
that when you want to be in a relationship so bad and you get into that
Yeah.
relationship, or you become a parent and then you're like, I'm such and such's mother,
Mhm.
such and such's wife, right? And then you don't really see that you've lost yourself in the
Mhm.
midst of all of these things, because like society tends to value one thing and God's kingdom values something totally different.
Mhm.
Mhm.
It's so true. And there's an organization that I'm involved in, and I go to their conferences. It's called MBK MSK. It's my brother's keeper, my sister's keeper, and it's
Mhm.
really a space for lawyers to come together and get some of that professional leadership development growth, but also the community. And I love when they do panels, when they ask you to introduce yourself, you answer the question, who am I? And you answer it kind of 3 times. And I love that format because, like, who are you? Not
Mhm.
your profession. So you're not saying like, I'm a lawyer. So for me, it was like, I'm the daughter of an amazing mother who raised me by herself, and I am her delight. You know,
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
am someone who creates stunning blankets because my crochet game is on fleek. I don't know if people still
Oh.
say on fleek, but like just, but just those types of things, so
Mhm.
it's the richness of who am I and sharing that. And so to your point, when people, like you said, don't know they're in crisis, if you can't say who you are without talking about, your job, or just like being tied to the people who are around you, there's probably some identity work to do there. Who are you at your core when no one else is around? Who has
Mhm.
God told you that you are? And get clear on that. That doesn't take away from the roles that you then fit into, being a mother, being a wife, and this, but like, who are you when you are sitting alone and it's just you, and it's just you and God? Who is that person? What are your fundamental values? What do you care about? Because again, when you don't have that clarity, you get pushed and pulled in ways that are not always helpful or healthy for you.
You're talking about something that some people may not be conscious of, which is emotional intelligence. That's one of the
Hmm.
things that you offer your clients.
Yep.
Essentially, that people are not self-aware enough. Like you can't see it.
Yeah. Yeah. And that piece, like with EQ, because it's amazing, like doing a lot of work with clients, I feel like we're in like buzzword city. Like so many
Mhm.
terms get thrown around now, and everybody's like, oh, I've got EQ, I've got emotional intelligence, but they stop really at step 1. So they're like, I'm self-aware, but you're not self-regulating. It's
Mhm.
not just about having awareness, but if you are aware that you like to use a lot of words, and you like to be the center of attention, are you regulating that in spaces? Are you being intentional about inviting other people to contribute their thoughts? Like, are you, so that's the thing, it's the regulation piece that people, to me, miss. And so once you're aware of it, now what are you doing about that? How are you leveraging that awareness so that you show up and are a stronger leader, a stronger teammate? You're contributing in a way that is holistically helpful to the larger body and not just about yourself. And so it's hard work. Like
Mhm.
actually getting high EQ and being strong in that area, it requires us to um, prioritize the goals that you're trying to achieve at a certain moment, as opposed to being right. So I always tell people, like, you're focused on being right instead of reconciliation. Like, you're prioritizing wanting your point of view as opposed to achieving the goals that you said mattered the most in that instance. So pride will have you out in these streets.
Listen, I'm about to flip back in my chair in a minute. I'm just like hashtag true. And
Yeah.
I know we can kind of travel down that path, but I want to circle back around to you, kind of like in this crisis that you were in, and
Hmm.
feeling like, okay, your mom has pretty much given you permission
Yep.
to pivot. What was that like for you? Because you just kind of juxtapose it, like this one season of your life where on the outside, people think that you are just living the best life. You thrive and you out there
Hmm.
like, hey, 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 and you're posting, but yet secretly you're on that couch trying to, pull yourself out of a state of depression. Like,
Hmm.
when did you kind of like make that shift, and where did you ultimately land?
Hmm. I
And
mean,
when?
Yeah.
People want to know, how long did it take you?
Like, so honestly, the shift came when I got to a point where I actually decided I was going to commit suicide. And that was a conversation that God and I had in that moment where I feel like he really spoke to me, and pulled me up by my bootstraps and out of that. And then I had to start doing the work. It was really, having to decide. I had to decide. I wanted to be here and I wanted better. And that process, it took a long time. So I would say that was early 2000 and I guess 16. And so the rest of that year was me kind of taking steps, moving in the correct direction.
What does that mean? Like, what does that mean? Like, you said it was a process, it was a steps, because there's some people, we have to remember, some people are going through what you've been through.
Yep.
And they don't know how to pull themselves out. So can you kind of like walk us through? So the first thing that you did was, you had a conversation with God. And then secondly, you had to make a decision that you wanted to be there.
Exactly.
Then, what did everything else look like after that?
Yeah. So first it was, I had to be kinder to myself. That was the next thing. So I congratulated myself every day for every step I took. So one day it might just be, I'm going to get up and take a shower today and put on clothes and walk to the mailbox. That might have been all I did that day, but I hadn't gotten off the sofa. And to be clear, I showered daily before someone's like, oh, she wasn't like, no, but that was like for a while, like that was my daily accomplishment. I took a shower. So now it's like I took a shower and I went to the mailbox. It's like I took a shower and I walked to the grocery store. So it was adding, like getting me out of the house was part of it too, because I was isolated. So I'm on this year off, but all my friends are still working. So I saw them, but it wasn't like I was surrounded by people all the time. So I had to start making myself leave the house. I started reading my word and trying to figure out like who was God for myself, as opposed to who I grew up thinking he was. I feel like, in your church, it was more of this kind of like fire, brimstone, I don't want to go to hell. So there was this fear as opposed to reverence. And so just trying to understand him fundamentally for myself, re-engaging with therapy. And I always tell people, like, you may not get on the first time out of the gate the therapist that is right for you, but just talking to someone and trying additional therapists until you find the right one for you. I think I went through 3 before I found the one who resonated the best with me. And then opening up to people and letting them know I wasn't okay, and having to, and not everyone, but a couple of people who I could trust, and asking them to check on me. They didn't realize, and even then I didn't tell them how bad it was. I was just like, I need you to check in on me. Like, I'm very isolated. I need just to feel more connection. So I asked for what I needed, but I still even wasn't fully transparent. Like, the first time I shared this period of my life was in 2020 on a panel. And there were so many people in that room who remembered when I took that year off. And they were just like, I had no idea that you were struggling because you just put on this mask and this face. And so it was the practical steps of doing a little bit more every day, re-engaging with therapy, re-engaging with God, and figuring out who he was. And then part of it was I moved back to the States, and that wasn't related to this. It was just that I decided to go in-house and there was more opportunities for me here. So I moved back to the state, but I also just stopped pretending. That was a big step. I stopped pretending I was okay if I wasn't. And I stopped trying to be who other people wanted me to be. And I just started being myself. Which and I relationship pruned. So there were relationships that I had to let go of because what attracted them to me was either me being broken. So there was something in my brokenness that resonated with them, or I could only be a part of myself. Like, I'm multifaceted. We all are. So they only wanted the funny Morenike, or they only like, or I thought that's all they wanted because that's what they kind of be like, oh my gosh, I love you. You're so funny. Like, that's what they praised. And so I let a lot of relationships go. And so if I couldn't show up as myself holistically, then I couldn't be around that person. I also set boundaries for myself. I was very fragile.
Mhm.
In that state, it's like when your skin is exposed and you're just sensitive to everything. And
Mhm.
so I had to be honest about my triggers,
Mhm.
what was triggering to me, a lot of introspective work, like how do I feel when X happens? And I journaled and I took notes about that. And excuse me, and that was helpful because there are certain people who I had to protect my energy is a long-winded way of saying that is I don't have a lot of energy to expend because I'm in a process of healing and rebuilding. And so if
Mhm.
this is someone who takes energy from me, I just wouldn't necessarily um, reach out to go do stuff with them because I wasn't in a space where I could. So I prioritized myself. I set boundaries. I said no a lot.
I love so first of all, thank you. All of those are incredibly practical. And I think the thing that stood out, like everything you said, was good.
Mhm.
But the thing that stood out most was when you said establishing boundaries.
Mhm.
And I think that sometimes our standards can be so low. And when they're low, everyone has access to you. And then
Yes.
as you gradually move up, less people have access. And the way to do that is to establish different levels of boundaries in your life and to be okay with your no. Um,
Mhm.
I know I met someone who said that, like they felt like I always said no. And when I was in a season of hurt, I had to close myself off so that I could really heal.
Mhm.
I couldn't do that listening to too many different voices. Like I started
Exactly.
to really isolate and listen to God. I needed to hear
Yeah.
his voice, and I can never hear his voice when other voices are just as loud in my ear. And so
Mm,
I love that idea of boundaries and then just kind of like marinating is what I
yes.
also heard you say. Like I immerse myself in God so hard that my kids they would get in the car and Joyce Meyer CD would be playing and they asked me if they could listen to the music and I said no because I need this Joyce and I listened to her straight for 3 years when I
Right.
listened to the radio. I didn't even know who these different artists were at one point
Yeah.
because I was like, and it wasn't about like I'm just eliminating all secular music. It was that I needed something that was going to feed my soul and my spirit.
Mhm.
And that was doing it, like kind of like the word of God. And
Mhm.
so, like, how did you get to the place where you started your own business? Like, okay, so you came back to the States, you had, you immersed yourself in the word of God, you went back to therapy,
Mhm.
you started doing a lot of internal work for yourself, you came back. Then, like, is that when you said, okay, I think I want to go into business for myself? I'm not going to go back to practicing law. Like, what happened?
No, I still practice law for probably another 5, 6, 7 years. So it was still there was a piece of me that wasn't ready to let go of that. Um,
Mm.
and I'm gonna be honest, like it feels good when people are proud of you, they're proud of what you do.
Mhm,
And I
mhm,
hadn't quite unlocked what the other thing was I was going to do. Now it just wasn't defining me. So I looked at it as this is something I'm good at. This is a way that I can support myself. So I had different perspective. When
mm,
I started to get clear on wanting to go full time with my business, and I say like with purpose and just starting to lean in, probably 4 or 5 years ago, I just started having a desire to figure out, like, what am I meant to do? And
mm,
so I read certain books and I'm still like, I'm not feeling like I got it yet, Lord, but I'm going to keep trying. And then just getting really intentional around reflecting over the year, reflecting on what I'm good at. I think with purpose, sometimes we overcomplicate it in a way to practically just start to
mhm.
discover it is to sit and think like what am I really good at and what do I really enjoy and look for the places that those intersect. And so like for me, coaching is something I've always just done with people. I just never thought about doing it as a profession or charging people to coach
Mhm.
with me. And so it was something that I just did with friends and mentees and people naturally, and I enjoyed it and I felt a level of excitement when I saw people experiencing transformation or getting their goals that I was like, oh, this is how my friend looks when he practices law. There's something there.
Mm,
So that was when I started to think like maybe I want to do this just, initially as a hobby, through my last company, I got to do it at work. So it was part of my 9 to 5. So I was like, maybe this is it, where I just have it be a part of my 9 to 5 role. It was at the top of the pandemic when I think we all got shut in,
Mhm,
literally out of nowhere in a very in an unexpected way. And so what I will say also is the fact that I did the healing and the journey that I had previously, I wasn't afraid now of being by myself in like my own time. And I would, in fact, I obviously the circumstances, COVID, horrible. I was probably one of among my friend group people who was like, I was thriving. I was thriving in my house. They were climbing the walls, and I was in my little hobbit hole doing self-development. You talk about going on like a sermon binge. I feel like there was 6 months where God would not let me watch anything but sermons. So I probably
mhm,
watched everything that Transformation Church had done since the beginning, like TD Jakes, like all of these things. So I was being nourished and accelerated during that time. And I was just deeply reflecting and
mhm,
looking for vision. That's when I really decided I'm going to do this full time, because the number of people who are coming to me and the frequency that they were coming to me, it's almost like it found me, in the sense of like, the more I leaned into it, the more it drew closer to me. And one of my friends who became a client, she would jokingly say, "Hey, I need to talk to you. You're my executive coach," and da 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 da. And I eventually was like, "No, I am your coach, and I'm going to launch my business full time." And well,
mhm,
and so but I still kept my 9 to 5. So I was working for several years while running my business. So it'd be like I'd work all day, and then nights and weekends would be when I would build my coaching business and service my clients. And then it really got to a point of I looked so much more forward to that work, that
mhm,
it was, do I keep giving it just part of my energy, or do I have crazy faith and bet on what I believe the vision is that God gave me? And so that's when
mhm,
I leapt last year and went completely full time into entrepreneurship. And it's been amazing. And God has been really faithful in the opportunities that He continues to bring to me. So it was, I had to do the searching for it. And then as I felt like I was getting clear on the vision, I wrote it down and continued to iterate on it and clarify as I continued to talk to Him and ask Him, what is it that you want me to do? And He'll tell you. It's, again, it goes back to what you said, creating that stillness and the
mhm,
space to get that revelation. And whatever someone's, spiritual leaning is, at the end of the day, being still and having space for you mentally just to get those downloads, get the revelation, just to imagine, to
mhm,
vision. Like, we don't imagine anymore. We don't think of how big it could be in life, how great it could be, what you could do if you
mhm,
cast off all the restraints. So I tell people, like, what would you do, like, if money was an issue? Like, what
mhm,
would you do
mhm,
if you didn't have limits? And then start to vision from that place. And so that was really kind of what it was. And
mhm,
just deciding that I was going to bet on myself and bet on this dream and not turn back. And it's been, to me, very fulfilling. And it, again,
mhm,
it's been another exercise of me redefining and reimagining how I see myself, because I
mhm.
didn't see myself as an entrepreneur necessarily, but I am, and I enjoy it.
Love that. I mean, this is such an inspiring and incredible story that you shared. And it's something that you said very early on just stood out to me, which was you said you were capable, but you weren't called. Woo,
Mhm.
Jesus, that was
Yes.
so good because I think sometimes we find ourselves in life. Sometimes you're at a crossword road where you realize like, okay, I'm really good at this, but I don't love it. Right.
Yes.
So what am I supposed to do with the rest of my like, and you see examples of that similarly in some ways in the Bible too.
Mhm.
And so it's this journey that we're all on to kind of like rediscovering ourselves,
Yeah.
rediscovering who God has called and created us to be. And so I just like your story is just really heartfelt for me. It's incredible. It's inspiring. And so as we begin to kind of like pull this all together and close out, if people are trying to reach you and connect with you, Morenike, how can they find you?
Yeah, so you can go to my website is revisioncoaching.com. And so you can submit a form through there to connect and grab some time if you're interested in exploring kind of coaching. I'm on LinkedIn, so it's just under my name. I'm on IG. So it's the Morenike Williams. Facebook is the Morenike Williams. I'm just now getting into Twitter. I'm not Twitter, I'm TikTok. And so it's just my name, like at Morenike Williams. And so yeah, that's where I'm at, and I would love to connect. LinkedIn is definitely a place where I spend a good amount of time, and I enjoy the conversations and dialogues there. So that's the place where I'm most likely to probably respond and engage with folks. But any of those platforms would be a great way to reach me.
I love that. And don't worry, I'll put all of that in the show notes. When you were saying the Morenike Williams, I was thinking you were going to say like show, right? Like the Morenike Williams show, like you have this show that you are hosting. So yeah, so I'll be sure to put that in the show notes. And I just want to thank you again for joining me today and sharing your amazing story with the listeners. And so thank you again, Morenike, for showing up for me today. Appreciate you.
No, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Amen.